Keeps coming back. He's asked about these enemies within comments. And I've read all of it. I've listened to all of it. It's hard for me to know what he really means about it. But that's not my question. My question is, why is it necessary?
Well, Bill, first of all, Donald Trump is unfiltered. I think this is one of the reasons why the campaign has gone well is because he's not doing a basement campaign strategy. He's not just running on slogans. When people ask him questions, he speaks from the heart.
Earlier this morning, Donald Trump's running mate, JD Vance, was pressed by two Fox News hosts about recent comments made by Trump that Democrats are the enemy within against whom the military may need to be deployed. JD Vance's response was equal parts dishonest and dangerous, and you need to hear it. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have one clip to look at here. It's about 2.5 minutes long, but you need to hear the whole thing. So Fox actually asked JD Vance about this, and I was kind of surprised. I figured that Bill Hemmer and Dana Perino would be inclined to sidestep the issue, but they do ask, and at one point they even press for clarity when JD Vance tries to spoon feed them, BS. They don't go as far as I think they should, right? They still throw it's a relative softball, but the fact that they asked this question and pressed JD Vance at all is worthwhile, I think. So we're going to play the clip and we'll unpack it together. But brace yourselves because this is maximum gaslighting from the perpetually dishonest JD Vance.
Interviews over the weekend and also throughout the past week, he keeps coming back. He's asked about these enemies within comments. And I've read all of it. I've listened to all of it. It's hard for me to know what he really means about it. But that's not my question. My question is, why is it necessary?
Well, Bill, first of all, Donald Trump is unfiltered. I think this is one of the reasons why the campaign has gone well is because he's not doing a basement campaign strategy. He's not just running on slogans. When people ask him questions, he speaks from the heart. And sometimes that means he's going to talk about issues that the mainstream media isn't focused on. But I think America.
So let's just stop right there. So to me, what that suggests is that, no, Donald Trump didn't misspeak. Donald Trump didn't speak off the cuff and he just fumbled his words. It's not what he meant, which is sometimes what we hear from Trump acolytes and Trump sycophants trying to, clean up his messes. JD Vance says, actually, no, he meant every word of it. He spoke from the heart, right? He's someone who is unfiltered. So to be clear, JD Vance, Donald Trump's running mate, is saying that when Donald Trump says that Democrats are the enemy within and that he wants to deploy the military against them, that is Donald Trump speaking from the heart. Food for thought. We'll continue.
Americans are asking themselves, when we had these terrible riots in the summer of 2020, 20 people died, $13 billion in property damage, why wasn't law enforcement empowered to put down these riots, to reimpose law and order on American cities? That's, to me, what President Trump is talking about here, is that when you have local officials, when you have local rioters burning down American cities, when you have folks like Tim Walz encouraging rioters to go after local police stations, you need to have a federal response that reimposes law and order in this country.
I should say, and we played this, there is audio of then President Trump publicly praising then Minnesota Governor Tim Walz for his response to the George Floyd protest. We have Trump on audio praising Tim Walz. So that undercuts this criticism that JD Vance is trying to make here.
That's how I understand his comments is, look, we've obviously got some very important enemies to focus on overseas, but if people are burning down our cities, then of course we have to have a police response to that very basic violation of our right of public security.
He mentioned Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi by name in this case over the weekend.
Yeah, Bill, well, look, I mean, you have Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi who have been really part of weaponizing the Department of Justice against our country. I think what Donald Trump is saying is, look, we are the strongest country in the world. We've got the best people in the world, but we do have some broken leadership. We have people like Nancy Pelosi who's getting rich off of insider stock trades, even as our own country has gotten poorer,
I should also say that Donald Trump, when he was the president of the United States, violated the constitutional emoluments clause. He was still receiving money for his private businesses, of which he did not divest himself, and which were also entangled in state business, right? Usually to avoid the conflict of interest, presidents like President Jimmy Carter, for example, sold his peanut farm so he would not, as a businessman, benefit financially during his time in office. Donald Trump did not do that. His properties and his companies made a ton of money when he was president. His children and his sons-in-law, like Jared Kushner, made millions or billions of dollars, depending on the trademark or the Saudi deal that Jared Kushner made shortly after leaving the Trump White House. So if JD Vance is seriously concerned about the corruption of Nancy Pelosi benefiting from quote unquote insider trading, then he should be even more outraged by the orders of magnitude greater racket coming from Donald Trump and the Trump family. But of course, he's not, because his hypocrisy is on full display and his standards are totally one-sided.
Obsessed, Nancy Pelosi is obsessed with Donald Trump, not with reimposing policies that are going to deliver peace and prosperity for the American people. And of course, like I said, we do have people on the left, not most people to be clear, but some people on the left who are encouraging violent responses to what we believe is going to be a Donald Trump victory in a couple of weeks. That's not okay. And I think it's totally reasonable for the president to point out that, yes, we've got the strongest country in the world, but we do have some broken leaders in Washington. It's why we're running this race.
So again, just a really disingenuous response. What Democratic leaders are encouraging violence against Donald Trump in the event that Trump wins? None. Whereas when Donald Trump lost the last election, Donald Trump fomented a violent insurrection. Violent rhetoric is deployed all the time by MAGA Republican influencers, MAGA Republican politicians. As a matter of fact, political violence in this country is much more represented by the right against the left than the left against the right. And to say nothing of the incendiary rhetoric, of which, again, there's a staggering asymmetry. For every one example that JD Vance could cite of President Biden, Vice President Harris, or a Democratic elected official saying something truly incendiary about Donald Trump and a MAGA Republican, we can find 2 to 3 to 4 examples of Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans talking about Democrats in such way. Again, it's a totally disingenuous talking point, reflective of the fact that he just wants MAGA Republicans to be able to say and do whatever the hell they want against whomever they want, wherever they want, with impunity, but they can't handle a fraction of the same energy in turn. True snowflake behavior from JD Vance, profoundly hypocritical, profoundly dishonest. And again, those Fox News hosts could have gone much further in pressing him about this. Like Bill Hemmer was full of crap when he was like, well, I don't know really who he's talking about. Well, Bill, you demonstrated just a few minutes later that you do know who he's talking about, because you reminded JD Vance that Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi, who were not violent insurrectionists or violent rioters during the George Floyd protests, they were just political opponents and critics of Donald Trump, that Trump specifically name dropped them when he was talking about the enemy from within against whom the military might need to be deployed. So again, Bill Hemmer, the Fox News host, is being a little disingenuous. But the fact that they asked the question and pressed JD Vance at all to Fox News viewers is something that I think is important. But again, as a reminder, Donald Trump did repeatedly refer to his Democratic critics, his opponents, as the enemy within. He was given so many off-ramps by Fox News and other interviewers to basically clean up the language. He chose not to. He doubled down. So then the question becomes, well, what about the president's authority to actually quash the quote-unquote enemy within? What happens if Donald Trump becomes president again? And again, this is something worth contemplating. So USA Today has a write-up about this, food for thought. Here's what's to know about the president's powers in relation to deploying the National Guard and the military. Number one, Biden controls the military until Inauguration Day. Only the president of the United States has control over the military. That means President Biden will remain the commander-in-chief until either Trump or Harris is likely inaugurated on January 20th, 2025. The National Guard serves state and federal functions, but is largely under control of state governors. The president controls the D.C. National Guard. Presidents can deploy the military domestically through the Insurrection Act. So there's this idea in general called posse comitatus, and it comes from like an 1860s era law, if I remember correctly, basically saying that the military can't be used for civilian law enforcement purposes. However, the Insurrection Act, which basically goes back to the era of President Washington, is a workaround for this. So presidents can deploy the military domestically through the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act consists of statutes dating back as far back as 1792. According to the Brookings Institution, if it is the primary law defining cases in which a president may deploy federal troops in the face of civil unrest. It lays out the following 3 scenarios for authorizations of force. Number 1, the state requests federal assistance. Number 2, a rebellion makes it impossible to enforce federal law. Number 3, some sort of violence or conspiracy depriving others of their constitutional rights. The law is meant to be an exception to the core U.S. legal principle that the military should not be involved in civilian affairs. Again, that's posse comitatus. They go on to say that Trump floated using the military against the 2020 summer protests. He also talked about using the military to seize voting machines as he was losing the 2020 election. He actually drafted a memo to that effect, but he was threatened with mass resignations from the Justice Department if he proceeded, and so he backed down. This Donald Trump is very different. This Donald Trump is saying the people who threaten to either not enforce my orders or to resign and protest will not be there because I will only appoint people like JD Vance who will never tell me no and will obediently, sycophantically do everything I say. I should also point out that legal experts have said that when the president invokes the Insurrection Act, it's seen as widely non-justiciable, meaning that the Supreme Court historically has not even tried to touch when the president deploys the Insurrection Act because it's seen as basically one of the few absolute powers or near absolute powers of the president. And I should also say that if Donald Trump becomes president and he deploys the Insurrection Act, which is possible that he won't, but the fact that he's threatened to do it is something to take seriously. If he does do it, the Supreme Court, which is not inclined to interfere in the Insurrection Act to begin with, this Supreme Court is composed of a 6-3 conservative supermajority, 3 of whom were appointed by Trump himself. So this is a recipe for disaster. And perhaps the best way to avoid it is to make sure Donald Trump doesn't become president and make sure he loses the election on November 5th. Food for thought. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.